אני מאמין באמונה שלמה בביאת המשיח. אני מאמין ואף על פי שיתמלא.
Well, I want to say what an honor it is to be invited to have such an incredible introduction and to see so many people in this room who nothing less than changed my life, taught me how to read and write and actually think, which is what I want to talk to you about today. So I have very little time to talk. I'm happy to answer questions at the end about anything you want, about my time in Iraq as a journalist, whatever interests you. But what I want to talk about is my belief. I believe in questioning. Now that might sound self-serving coming from a reporter whose professional career has involved interviewing people, but this is not an attempt to recruit you to the noble, if dying, profession of journalism. No, when I say I believe in questioning, I don't mean as a vocation, but as a belief in wonder, a belief in inquiry, a belief in an attempt to understand the world. I believe it is important to ask questions because without doubt, there can be no true belief at all. Only by challenging your most basic assumptions can you know what is really durable enough to withstand that challenge. For some of you, this might seem obvious, but for others of you, this is about the time in your lives when you might begin to ask, why are things the way they are, and how can we change them for the better? I was in 7th grade, sitting in Mrs. Cover's language arts class, when I first began to ask those questions. Before that, English for me was semicolons and dependent clauses, grammar and plots and stories. But Mrs. Cover didn't waste any time in her class in showing us that there was much more to books than just grammar and plot. I found my notes from the very first day of 7th grade language arts, September 12th, 1994. And Mrs. Cover was, and I assume she still is, very tough and challenging. And this is the very first thing I have in my notes. Universal questions. Questions that have been asked and will continue to be asked by people that have no specific answers. And I wrote examples. The first one, what is the meaning of life? Second one, what is the meaning of my life? Who am I? Do I exist? What is reality? Is there a God? Why do bad things happen to good people? Is there life after death? That was the start of my questioning everything about the world. I felt a little bit like a character in the story of Plato's allegory of the cave. And for those of you who don't know that story, it's about a group of slaves chained in a cave who are looking at a wall. They can't see anything except the wall. And on that wall, were you just learning this? And on that wall, you see images that are not real, but the slaves think it is reality. And that's all they know of the world. That flicker of reality is reality to them. But in this story, it is the philosopher, the person who critically questions the world around him, who is like a prisoner who breaks free from that cave and sees the real world and sees that what he saw before was just a flicker, a shadow of reality. That's how I felt when I began to ask questions and challenge the status quo. One of the very first things that helped me rethink my assumptions about the world and the fact that it can be viewed very differently was the realization that most people in the world are not like me. I remember when I was at Schechter, I thought everyone in the world was white, Jewish, upper middle class, and straight. I remember the story of one Schechter student who learned that John F. Kennedy was the first Catholic president and asked, all the other ones were Jewish? It was only when I left that I met people who were black, Hispanic, and Asian, who were Protestant, Catholic, Muslim, atheist, and agnostic, who were gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. And I believe it is by questioning and trying to understand people who are different than yourself that you really understand the world and yourself in turn, and learn that most people are much more alike than dissimilar. I learned this very well, actually exactly 5 years ago to this day, when I was in Iraq, writing a story about the last rabbi in Baghdad's last Yom Kippur in Iraq. And I spoke with the Iraqi Secret Service agent who used to spy on him. The two people could not be more dissimilar, were actually mortal enemies. But after years of questioning this rabbi and his family, the spy realized that they weren't so different after all. He is a good man, he told me. I think he's a lot like me. I believe that by really understanding other people and questioning the assumptions behind our institutions and our governments, that we begin to see the tremendous injustice, pain, and suffering that still exists in this world. In fact, I believe it is the duty of each and every one of us to challenge that status quo, to challenge the centers of power, and to try to make the world better. Perhaps my favorite Talmudic story is from Bava Metzia. There was a big, to shorten the story because I don't have much time, there was a big theological debate with all the sages in consensus except for one, Rabbi Eliezer. So he said, if the halacha is according to me, let this carob tree be uprooted from the earth. And it was. But the sages still didn't believe him. So there were other miracles that followed, eventually ending with the voice of God calling down and saying to the sages that Rabbi Eliezer was right. But that did not convince the sages. One of the rabbis rose up and said, Lo b'shamayim hi. It is not in the heavens. The meaning, God might have created the Torah, God might have created the world, but it is up to humans to question it and to interpret it and make their own decisions, and it is up to us to make the world a better place. And so I say to you what I believe more firmly than anything, that it is up to us to bring the heavens down to earth, to question why there is such injustice and how we can end it, to understand why people are different from each other and how we can cherish and respect those differences, and to strive to truly question who we are until we know ourselves fully. Only by asking the right questions can we break free from the shackles of the cave into the light of truth and know that we can create a heaven on earth. I know that you will be able to do this with the education you're receiving here, and I ask, do you have any questions?